Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Reckless a Talk, our TTRPG interview show, where we sit down with some of our favorite writers, players, GMs, and streamers to get to know a little bit more about what makes them who they are. I am, as always, your host, GM Nathan, and I am, as usual, very excited and kind of uniquely a little weirded out, but in a good way, to introduce you to this week's guests, Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble. Those names may be familiar to D&D aficionados for several reasons. Firstly, they are both members of the brand and communications team at Wizards of the Coast, the publishers of D&D. And secondly, they are the longtime hosts of Dragon Talk, Wizard of the Coast's D&D interview show. Their new book, Welcome to Dragon Talk, will be released December 5th and details some of their favorite interviews over the last 7+ years of hosting the podcast and interviewing folks like Matt Mercer, B. Dave Walters, Tanya DePass, and many others. Personally, Greg and Shelly were two of the earliest voices that I heard in the D&D world. Their interviews were unbelievably formative for me in those first few years of my time in the hobby. I think there's probably a direct line in kind of the narrative creation of Reckless Attack that begins with their interview with Chris Perkins and Tracy Hickman talking about the writing of Curse of Strahd, one of my favorites. Definitely go check it out. So it was a real pleasure to learn about their love of D&D and the amazing creators that enrich the space. A quick final note, there was a small technical difficulty with Greg's mic in the first 10-ish minutes of the podcast that causes a kind of ringing sound. I tried to edit around it as much as possible, and it does eventually drop out for the remainder of the interview, but wanted to make sure you knew that you could just kind of skip past that point if it makes your ears unhappy, and to offer our apologies. Thank you again for listening, and now on to Reckless to Talk with Greg and Shelly. Well, hello, Greg and Shelly.
Hello.
What wonderful enthusiasm to be met with at the top of the episode. How are you guys today?
Wonderful.
So happy, very excited. Although it is got a really bad poor air quality here in Seattle, so I'm glad I'm inside.
It's a little sad out there today.
You know, the outdoors are overrated. I think we can all agree, right? You know, who needs that? Let's just stay inside and play Dungeons and Dragons.
We are the indoor kids.
What choice did we have?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that we want to and are most comfortable inside. It's the smog.
Yeah.
You know, we have to stay inside and play video games and not go exercise or whatever. So,
True
you
that.
know, we get it.
Exactly.
We're cool. For those of our listeners who may have just like hit automatically play and not paid attention to any sort of introductions that I have done at the top of this episode, could you please introduce yourselves, who you are, your pronouns, your job titles, what you're doing here, all the good stuff.
Gregory, you want to go?
Sure, I am Greg Tito. My full name is Gregory. That's right. Nobody.
I don't know why I called you Gregory. Gregory.
A scoop.
It's funny. You and Kate Welch are the people who refer to me by my full name. I don't know why. It's very funny. But yes, I am the co-host of Dragon Talk, the official Dungeons and Dragons podcast, along with my amazing co-host Shelly. And we wrote a book called Welcome to Dragon Talk, and I'm very excited to talk more about the D&D community with some folks within the D&D community. So we're excited about that.
And I'm Shelly Mazzanoble. My real name is Michelle, and a lot of people don't know that. Like, people who know me very, very well are surprised to find out. My name is Michelle. And I, along with Greg, work at Wizards of the Coast on the D&D team, and am Greg's co-host and co-author of Welcome to Dragon Talk. So yeah, super excited to talk to you, Nathan.
Yes, I was telling you guys ahead of time. I have been a longtime listener to Dragon Talk, and it was
First time caller.
Yeah, it was very much like formative of me as a dungeon master, as a player, as just a consumer of podcasts. And here I am, also doing a tabletop role playing game interview show. Much credit to you guys. So very, very excited to be
sweet.
talking to you guys generally, but also talking to you about your new Dragon Talk based book.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not rush into things.
No.
We don't want to get straight to the promo. Let's marinate in kind of the getting to know you portion just a little bit. You guys, much like we do, often ask your guests who come from all over the D&D and tabletop role-playing game sphere. We'll say that is, I don't know, you guys work for Wizards of the Coast. Is there a preferred geometric shape?
Multiverse.
Ooh, yes,
across the D&D
across the
multiverse.
planescape. You guys often, as you're talking to people, ask them, "Hey, how did you get started in D&D and playing tabletop role-playing games?" You guys talk about it in your new book, which is coming out December 5th.
5th, yes.
Yeah, yes, I remember.
Yes.
Good job, Nathan.
Nicely done.
You guys talk a little bit about kind of your introductions, but for the sake of the listening audience, how did you guys kind of dip your toes and start your journey into Dungeons and Dragons, which is now what you do all the time?
Okay, the short answer, my boss made me play.
Yeah. Tale as old as time, right?
I'm sure that, I mean, that's like how 90% of the people who play D&D got started.
I think I saw that news article. Yeah, you're right.
Kind of actually, as an aside, along those notes, my friend just sent me a meme that said something like, having a crush on someone makes you do really silly things. Why am I trying to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, I see.
And I'm like, yeah, you know what? A lot of people started playing D&D probably that way. I really liked my job at Wizards of the Coast. It was not on the Dungeons and Dragons team until it was.
Because you were Magic the Gathering, is that correct?
I got hired to work on Magic. Yeah. And then after Magic, I worked on almost every brand Wizards produced except D&D. And I was fine with that. I was very afraid of Dungeons and Dragons.
That was a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. It was like I would go into meeting rooms after D&D games were played, and they would leave their silly little maps on the whiteboards and their silly little words with all their consonants and apostrophes and like dice everywhere. Like what are even these dice? Like this is not normal. Who are these people and what are they doing? And then I got a job on the D&D team, light touch. It was on the publishing side because we started a children's book imprint, and then we also had the adult novels that were based on Dungeons and Dragons. And I loved that job, and I was so excited to have it because as a writer, it was very fun and exciting to work in publishing. And I was doing it for, I don't know, a few months, kind of hiding my ignorance, reading all of the kid books that we were publishing about Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, all those Dungeons and the Dragons, which I do know.
And eventually it was caught that I didn't know anything about how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And my boss is like, you should probably learn. This might actually be good for you to do your job here. And anyway, I had some other newish coworkers. So I ended up in a group with like six coworkers that were, with the exception of one, new to Dungeons and Dragons. And the dungeon master was very, very experienced and very, very dedicated to helping me create my first character. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I said it took us 3 days maybe to make that character. It was 3.5 edition. The only thing that I can do is name this character. I don't know anything else that is happening.
Yep.
It was just math and dice rolling and this and that. I said I wanted to be an elf because that felt very fantasy to me.
Yep.
And I wanted to be a sorceress because I wanted to be magical. And I thought that an elf sorceress sounds amazing. And so he made my character for me. He literally did everything. I just sat there next to him like, oh, please make this end. Oh,
can I come back? Like
I have something. This is not my job. And then he handed me my mini, which I always have next to me. This is what she looked like. I know not everyone can see it, but
I can. That's what's important.
She's gorgeous. She has long, flowy blonde hair, just like me, obviously.
For the listeners at home, that is factually correct.
Very not blonde.
We will say
the fantasy me is
contrary.
Apparently very blonde, and she's wearing beautiful purple / lavender robes. I mean, like, I probably wouldn't show that much midriff if I was, but she's beautiful. And she's had like a staff in her hand. And as soon as I saw her, I thought, oh my God, I love her. I think I might actually like this game. And we played our very first game. It was in Eberron. And within maybe 5 minutes, I realized, oh gosh, I was so wrong about this game. I had no idea. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't anyone tell me that this is just storytelling? It's just making things up. It's going on adventures. It's being this amazing character, like doing things that I'll never get to do in real life. And just the support of my party. Like, I wanted to protect them and they wanted to protect me. And I didn't care if I got the killing blow or someone else did. It was just like, we did this together, you guys. This is amazing. And it was supposed to just be a one-off, just like, here, teach these people
Yep.
how to play this game and then carry on. But no, we ended up playing for 3 years together.
Wow.
Like, that was like, we have to keep doing this. And we all became very, very close. Like, these were people that, I mean, I saw in the kitchen. I was making my lunch and I'm like, hey, how was your weekend? Cool. And now, like, they all went to my wedding and one of them even officiated the wedding.
Wow.
he was the cleric in the party, so it made sense.
Very appropriate.
Do it. So yeah, it was very, very eye-opening, and boy, was I wrong. But I like to say, like, D&D finds you. When it's time for you to play Dungeons and Dragons, D&D will find you. So I guess my time was not until 2006.
When it was literally when you were voluntold to play.
When I was voluntold to play, yes.
What about you, Greg?
I had a completely different but also very similar story. I was a fan of fantasy. I loved the Rankin Bass animated version of The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
My older brother at the time, was reading the book, and he was telling me things that were in it and that weren't in the series. So I devoured so much fantasy literature at the time, pulling stuff off of my brother's shelf. And one of the times I pulled off a Dungeon Master's Guide, and I just started thumbing through it and understanding that this was a game that was like in a simulated world of these fantasy novels. And I was so enamored with fantasy at the time that I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to embody these amazing characters and get to play them. And they were so evocative, those descriptions in those books. We found out later on that book was like a hand-me-down that we got somehow. So that's how it ended up on my shelf. But once my mom kind of figured out what I was doing, was like, I don't know if that's good. There's some demon work in there. You shouldn't do it. And I wasn't really able to find any friends, nearby who would be able to do it. I played a couple of times here and there, but nothing ever really kind of coalesced. And then when I got to high school and college, the theater called my name, and I was doing so many shows and working so hard that I didn't really have any free time to get into D&D. Then I was living in New York, and I got married and was living my life there when I realized, I can play D&D if I want to. And so I found a group there, and this was also the 3.5 era. We played through the Age of Worms campaign, and it was just this wonderful storytelling experience. So the Dungeon Master at the time was illuminating us with all of these wonderful stories of Mishka the Wolf Spider and the Dukes of Aqua. And I was like, oh, this is so great. I love all of it. And we played through that whole campaign. And the folks in that group, some of them went on to collaborate on 4th edition era stuff, which I find both amazing and gratifying. That such a small group ended up having such a huge impact on all of our lives, really. And I started doing more game journalism and writing about games, mostly video games. I wanted to always write more about D&D. And because I was fascinated with it and how it blended all of the amazing stuff of performance that I love, as well as storytelling and maps and there's just so much there. And I wanted to tell the world about it. And luckily enough, I was able to get hired at Wizards of the Coast to do exactly that, to tell the world about D&D and how cool it is. As I'm now the senior communications manager there, so I deal with talking to press about what makes it awesome, as well as our general messaging and everything like that. So it's a dream come true. Part of that was to be able to come and talk on a podcast with Shelly, which was pretty accidental and amazing that it occurred. But it kind of changed everything from there when I started doing the podcast.
And that was like one of your first couple weeks at Wizards of the Coast well, I think I've heard or read different versions. I think Shelly's version was slightly different retelling than your version in the book in a fun way, where your version, Greg, was like, I made doe eyes over at Shelly. to be like,
Yeah.
can I be on the podcast maybe? And Shelly's like, I don't know. I guess Greg was also there, so we added him as a fourth host.
I don't
early on.
remember the doe eyes. I just remember like, oh, he's our communications manager. This seems like something he should do. Do you want to be on this podcast we do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was such in the make content all the time mode of game journalism that I was anybody that was like, oh, you want to do something? I was like, yes, put me on. I didn't even know what the podcast was or anything about it really until I was on it, which was fantastic. But yeah, it was fun to be able to be on that first episode. I think there was 4 hosts with only 1 or 2 guests on
maybe
there.
not even a guest. Like you were a guest one, like we must have just like all gotten in the room and have been like, anyone a guest? Greg,
anyone want to talk?
Let's learn about you today.
Sure. Well, and that's interesting, and a nice kind of transition for me, because early on, and you talk about this in the book, but it is a lot of very internal guest kind of things, right?
Yes.
It is designers, it is staff members of Wizards of the Coast in that kind of the early days of Dragon Talk. As you were launching Dragon Talk, and as you were kind of looking around the office and dragging people into spare closets or whatever you could spare at the time, what was kind of this sounds pretentious, but what was the vision for Dragon Talk? Did you have one, or is it just, I don't know, let's sit down and talk and see what kind of comes of it?
Like the early days, like pre-Greg?
Like I kind of viewed it, at least as a listener, was very like there was kind of the internal only arc, and then you kind of started bringing in more creators, more podcasters, streamers, writers, that kind of stuff, and it kind of started becoming a very different beast.
That was all Greg. Really? Like, well, for one thing, I don't think we even had the technology to talk to people who weren't literally in the building with us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that would limit. So if anybody was like happened to be coming to Seattle or was a Seattle native or in the area, we could certainly invite them into the office to do this podcast with us, but we didn't have the means to use Zoom or anything to talk to people. But Greg was really the one after that fateful doe-eyed day where he got dragged into Dragon Talk, which wasn't called Dragon Talk at the time. Somehow like Bart was involved, Bart Carroll, but he ended up moving over to a role on the Magic team. So he couldn't work on D&D anymore. So he was out. And then Trevor Kidd was one of the hosts and he kind of phased out as well. And I just remember like Greg and I were the only 2 that showed up.
We're there.
And Ryan Marth, our producer and sound engineer, was like, I guess this is your podcast now, guys. You're doing
what do
it.
you want to do with it?
And so like, Greg had some really good ideas, which you can certainly speak about, Greg, but really like the whole, we wouldn't have a podcast called Dragon Talk that comes out on Wednesdays without Greg.
For sure. Yeah. And it was not a regular occurrence. There was episodes that came out when the timing and everyone's schedule allowed.
Yeah.
There wasn't a regular cadence, and I had started listening to podcasts. Actually, I didn't really listen to podcasts until I moved out to Seattle. I actually remember the first road trip I took with my buddy, bringing stuff out here to Seattle from North Carolina, was when we're like, oh, people like podcasts. Let's do this Serial thing. People keep talking about this. Let's listen to Serial. We listened to that the whole way through, and I was like, I love podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew?
It turns out,
right? I had made a few. I had done some interview podcasts at The Escapist, and so I had edited and done them all, but I was not a consumer of them on my own. And it was when I started to enjoy the kind of weekly cadence of listening to the new podcasts that are coming out that I was like, we should do that for this. Like, this makes total sense. We should brand it. We should get our fun little icon on the Apple podcasts site, and we had a little bit of a branding talk about what we should name it, what we should bring to it, what are we going to call it, how are we going to describe what it is to people. Like, none of those things had really been done before, because there had been such a I wasn't even a labor of love. It was just like a labor of like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we should have a D&D podcast, and so we do. There we go.
Right. And then again, the technology, being able to talk to people on Skype, that changed up everything, because and I remember that being like a hard thing to kind of overcome at first, because we were like there's, the whole audio feedback
Yeah.
issue and how do we talk to people. Once we kind of got that solved, and we were using Skype so much that the call-in sound
That's
for
right.
calling someone on Skype
I
was a
forgot-
part of the podcast.
I forgot about that. Yes, I
for a
remember that
while.
very vividly.
Yeah, but then I also really remember talking to Rainn Wilson in that way, and we just started putting more calls out to people, and I particularly was surprised at how many people said yes, and how many people would be like, yes, I do want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I don't get a chance to talk about it. So we had some comedy writers doing stuff at late night shows early on that was like, oh, these are really great and important people, because I don't really associate comedy with D&D, but here we get to do that. And then I think that coalesced the idea that the podcast should be about bringing this stereotype of what a D&D player is and elevating that beyond what most people, my mom included, thought of what D&D fans were, right? And so that was gave us the preview to be like, okay, we can ask people. We Shelly and Bart had spoken to Dan Harmon before then, but we're like, let's get more guests like that. Let's get more guests who are creators in their own right, successful, and get some notoriety around this particular podcast, but then also just about D&D in general. About like, this game is not for you need to be social. You need to have all of these qualities of creativity around it in order to enjoy and love this game. Those are good qualities. Those are things that we can tout as being awesome. And that just became the underlying focus of everything about the podcast, was lifting up the voices of the community around us.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was always something that really struck me about Dragon Talk, was the breadth of people that you talk to, not just in terms of sheer numbers, because you've been doing it weekly for 7-ish years,
Yeah.
but also that you would talk to, doctors who were using it, in their like psychiatric practice, and you would talk to teachers, and you would talk to Hollywood actors, and you would talk to all kinds of people who connected with D&D in their own ways. Is this still the case? Like, still kind of the mission statement for you guys, just finding all of the people who interact with D&D in each way that they do and kind of spotlighting it?
Yeah, I'd say that's still the goal. Greg and I, we like to say lift you up always, like to each other, but also to like the guests, and making sure that people who are doing great work are getting recognized for that work, and just like, shining that spotlight on the incredible talent that's within our community. And also making sure that people can see themselves represented in the guests that appear on Dragon Talk, because that's really obviously very important to both of us. And I've never lost that feeling back in 2005 or 6 or whenever it was that Liz Shue made me play Dungeons and Dragons for the first time, that I did not think this was a game for me. I did not think that I would find my people here, or that this would be any sort of escape for me, or a creative outlet for me, or a safe space for me, or just general feel good entertainment for me. And I was very, very wrong. And I still, like, that holds true. And everything that I do is, I want to make sure more people find this game that wouldn't find this game normally. So I think that's also a crucial part of Dragon Talk, is showing that D&D is for everyone.
Yeah. And you don't have to be one type of person. It's a well-rounded individual, right? Like, you can, I even see it a little bit in the Wizard's office. Like, I'm one of the people who like sports. I like learning about what's going on in the baseball world, the basketball world. And that can sometimes be like, do you really, you work on D&D and you like sports? I'm like, yes, you can. You could do, like, you can like multiple things and have multiple interests.
Yes.
You can just be a person. And that was another big tenet early on, was just trying to show that, like, you can have a well-rounded slew of tastes and interests. D&D is just one of them, and wanted to highlight that part of people's lives when they come on.
So something that you talk a lot about in your book, and something that has kind of always been very apparent, is that kind of ethos of getting a wide breadth of people, trying to just find people doing interesting things around and with D&D, and bringing them on and talking about it. So for you guys, and I know you work with, I think, at least one producer or something to kind of do some research and vetting, but overarching, who is the ideal Dragon Talk guest, or what do you look for when you guys are trying to find someone to bring on the show and connect with?
It's a good question.
I think someone who's excited to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Which is not always easy, right? That's actually a much harder thing than some people would realize, right? Like, but what I think what's really good about what Shelly and I are able to do is, even if they're not comfortable, we make people feel comfortable kind of right away. And so it's not necessarily like you need to be comfortable doing that, but doing the interesting thing, as you're saying, like using D&D as a lens for their creativity in whatever way that is, whether it is through their work as teachers and educators, whether it's their work as streamers and performers in their own right, or storytellers. And we love hearing from folks who are screenwriters or creators like that, and how D&D was a training ground for them, right? And they might not necessarily be making anything that's D&D related. It may not be anything that is fantasy in any way, but the building blocks of how they created story and how they break story were forged around the table when they were kids, playing D&D, or when they're playing in their weekly group nowadays. So I think that's the only unifying feature, is someone doing something interesting using D&D, or around the scope of D&D.
And kind of to piggyback on that, something again you talk about in the book, and I think that Wizards has certainly been talking a lot about, kind of as a business, as an entity, as kind of a presence in the space, is diversity, is championing voices that are not the, kind of like middle-aged white dude players. I'd first kind of love to hear just kind of why you guys think that is important, and why other people should be thinking that that is an important thing to be doing. But also, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about making sure that what you guys are doing, the people you are championing, are those diverse voices, are a nice cross section of all the wide variety of people who can play and enjoy D&D?
Like a D&D party, everybody has a role. Everybody is doing something different. Everybody belongs there. Everybody supports each other. I feel like our community is a good representation of that. And nobody has any right to keep anybody out of this community. We all belong here. But I do think that Greg has been really instrumental in not just helping to shape the vision of what Dragon Talk is, but to really sort of put his money where his mouth is. Wait, did I say, is it mouth?
I think so, right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, and that's evident in the essay that he wrote about Tanya DePass. And I think that was a really inspiring conversation. I was not part of that interview, sadly. I missed that one for some reason, but Tanya talked a lot about what it was like to be Black in this community. And it was, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Greg. You can talk about that. But
it was a very Chicago-based
yes,
Chicagoan, Tanya DePass.
Yeah, exactly. And Bart was actually the co-host for that too, and he's from the Chicago area as well.
Yes.
So that was really interesting. But yeah, no, I had been following Tanya for a long time in the video game space, and I actually didn't know that she was a former D&D player. And it wasn't until I think she had a Twitter thread where she was live tweeting Jeremy Crawford's talk during OrcaCon here in Bellevue. And I was like, I didn't realize that she was. Well, let's have her on and have her talk through some of these things. And it was during the course of that interview and that conversation that just a few things kind of clicked into place for me, where I had been just a middle-class white dude with a beard, not really realizing that amount of privilege that had to be able to walk into a D&D store and be able to drop in and play D&D at any moment. Tanya had very different experiences sometimes with different people who brought their own stereotypes and frankly racism to the table. And I was like, that's really sad. And then I was like, there's really nothing I can do about that. And then I thought, well, there is one very small thing that I can do, which is to speak to more people of color, more people who have felt marginalized in this D&D community for a long time, and hear them and kind of make sure that they know that they're wanted to be a part of this community, and how that makes the entire breadth of people who play D&D that much more richer for it. And that's what I did. I just was like, hey, let's make sure we have more women as guests on the podcast, as well as people from different backgrounds, from not the traditional white kid playing D&D background and highlight their stories, and not necessarily make a situation where that's what the meat of every interview around them is about, but just showing that they are a part of this community because of their love of rolling dice and making up stories about elves and orcs and all the druids and fighters and sorcerers that we love to play with, right? And just hear their voices and their stories and highlight them. And I thought that it was the beginning of being able to invite more folks to do live streaming shows, to show that a little bit more publicly. And Tanya was a great instrumental part of that in creating Rivals of Waterdeep back in 2018, and it's still going today. I hope they are able to continue their story going all the way up to level 20. They're running an Indiegogo right now. So if you're interested in continuing to keep that diversity going in the Chicago area, certainly contribute and make sure they are able to keep that going and complete that story. So yeah, no, it's been, and I try to make that a large part of this book as well, as like how the D&D community was not always welcoming to people who didn't look like everyone else, right? And that wasn't necessarily always intentional. People, as always say, it was a product of that timing. But you know, I made the conscious decision back then to kind of work against that and to include. That was something that I would realize, like, in order to fight exclusion, whether it's intentional or not, you kind of have to include. And I think all of the stories and all of the kind of general feeling that D&D is more popular than ever, to me, you can't separate it. And so that was my one small thing that I did, and was very excited to be able to talk about that as something that Dragon Talk was a part of over the growth of this community, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just growing and it's becoming more richer because of all this. Just like, as Shelly, you started all this, just like a D&D party.
Just like a D&D party. You don't want a party of just rogues. Got to mix it up in there. I also want to add, though, it's one thing, the work that Greg and I do on Dragon Talk, but like, it's also very important for people who open up our books to also see themselves represented in there. And I think that our team of designers and art game designers and art directors and all have done a really good job in increasing the diversity of the characters that you're going to see on the covers of the book and inside those pages.
Absolutely. And that was what Tanya was remarking on, actually, in that when I found that tweet thread. She was very excited that the human fighter is depicted as a Black woman with dreads, and that she was very excited about that going forward. And that was, that started all forward. But even before I was there, like that was happening in the art direction of the Player's Handbook as it was released in 2014.
I was very excited to see chainmail bikinis go away.
Yes.
We're not doing that.
The Red Sonja era had passed, is what you're saying. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And that was great. I didn't even realize that as a fan of D&D going into and being a part of the team in 2015 when I started, that was an important brand level decision that was like, we are not going to be portraying women, especially as scantily clad or not heroes in their own right. And I love that has continued and only expanded over the course of the last few years and books that are out there.
My brain is going in 17 different directions. I'm going to do my best to do one at a time. First, I will ask. So you guys have been doing this again for 7-ish years, and have talked to a lot of different people. There are not too many repeat guests across your 360, I think 8 episodes as of maybe recording, something along those lines. And I know, as someone who has been doing interviews for this show and just kind of professionally before, that I learned so much and changed so much hearing all these perspectives and getting to connect with people. So over the course of your Dragon Talk careers, how have you been changed by the experience, by getting exposed to so many people, so many passionate, excited people who love what they're doing, and also real vulnerability?
Greg, you want to go first?
Sure. Many ways. I mean, it's almost impossible to
that makes sense.
Pick one. But one for me was a little bit more personal. I'd been a stand-up comedian before. I'd definitely been on stage and had to do that act of trying to get 200 people in a nightclub to like you. Not as easy as you think it is. each time I did that, I had amazing stage fright. I had this well of nervousness, and I never really kind of got over it, even after 3 years of doing that. And I had similar amounts of nervousness each time we started Dragon Talk back in the day. I used to just be like, "Oh my god, I hope I'm all right." I don't even know if you know this stuff. I used to have to like
I
psych
did
myself
not.
up in the bathroom and like, you know, uh, throw water in my face and try to
What?
yeah, I was sometimes more than others. I'm just like, I don't know if I can do
Oh
this.
my
And
God. I did not
I
know that.
part of that was from I don't know, not not having a sense of self-worth enough
Mhm.
to like be like, oh no, I can do this. But like the repetition of doing it every week, having someone that trusted and was so complimentary to me, Shelly, it just, you always lifted me up, and you always,
Hmm.
it was always just such a collaborative atmosphere week in and week out, even when we did things like on camera, when we were on Twitch and recording those ways live. And I thankfully don't get nervous anymore each time we start, right? Because I just know that I am among people who I trust and who trust me, and that we can have a hopefully entertaining conversation each time we get together and talk. And I think that part of me really appreciates that. And then being able to create this book with Shelly, I've done some writing, I've published some things, but nothing quite as gratifying as working on this, as well as bearing our soul a bit in this book about all of the things that we've been
Definitely.
talking about here so far. Has been really a wonderful experience, and I think it's given me a little bit of creative mojo back that I might have lost since I wasn't creating stuff for myself for about a decade or so. That's how it's touched me. I don't know. Shelly, can you live up to that?
I should have went first.
It's all right. Shelly, you can lie. That's fine.
No, I will say that I am continuously inspired by the people that play this game. And I think we're incredibly lucky that we get to do this for our day jobs. And it is a job. Like, I do not have a trust fund, even though I ask my dad often, like, are you sure? Do I have to keep working? I do want to work. I actually get really excited to come to my job every day because I know the impact that this game has on people.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly reminded of that, either by the people that we get to talk to every week, or the people who listen to this podcast and will drop us a note once in a while and tell us, hey, I listened to this episode and it was really inspiring, the thing that your guest said on there. And like, or having a guest say, I was on Dragon Talk and someone reached out to me and now I made this connection. And
Yeah.
now, I'm actually making a little bit of a living in this, doing what I love doing now. And so you just constantly have that reminder of the work that you do really does matter, that this game is more than just a fun way to pass hours with your friends. It's more than just entertainment. It's more than just a game. It really does make such a big difference in people's lives. And I love that I get to be part of this community and just like feeding off of this wonderful creative energy that people are constantly putting out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And something you've talked about already in this interview, something you talk about in the book, talk about the podcast, but about how obviously your podcast being just a long running, established, very good interview podcast, but the Wizards of the Coast interview show is a big platform to be sharing with people, obviously. And I know people who have been on it and have kind of been able to enjoy the experience and the connections made afterwards. But you guys can do and do a lot of lifting. And is that something that you guys, how do you carry that, I guess? What is the experience of kind of knowing how big of an impact you guys can have on creators, on passionate people, and being able to spotlight what they're doing, who they are? How do you guys connect with that and navigate that kind of, I don't know, responsibility is what it feels like to me in my limited capacity.
And now I'm really nervous about it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was such a big responsibility.
Oops. I'm sorry.
What are we doing?
I'm sorry you had to find out now as you're about to release a published book, and after having done it for 7 years from me. But oops.
Oopsie. I mean,
well, I get embarrassed each time, like someone like B. Dave Walters is the one that comes to mind, where it feels like anytime I interact with him, he makes sure to remind me that and the public that he would not be as big in the D&D community if it wasn't for me calling him one time to come and be a part of the Stream of Many Eyes. And it's I don't know. I guess embarrassed is probably the word. Like it feels like
that's reasonable.
I don't know. I don't really feel like it's anything that is about me or Shelly individually, because we feel very strongly about the D&D community as a whole, and I feel like we're just shining the lights on the folks that are doing the amazing stuff. And sure, we're making some decisions on where to point those lights, but it is the peoples that are reflecting the light that we're shining that is the real star, honestly. So I don't ever think about it on those grander terms, honestly. I just really get excited about meeting new people who have that passion around this game, and the word that Shelly said earlier, inspired constantly each week, inside and out. And that is such a boon to our day jobs, as Shelly said, because you can very honestly, even if you're working on something that is a passion project, being reminded of it week in and week out from some people who are we're close to, and some people that are strangers, is gratifying. And I think it does buoy us up and continue to lift us up to get the word out about D&D books and things like that. So it is a responsibility, but I also think of it as a blessing, as something that we feel very grateful to be a steward of.
And kind of sorry, please, Shelly, if you had anything to add.
Plus one. Inspiration granted.
Perfect. And kind of as an extension of that, and something that is certainly the case for me, but I think a lot of the people who listen to our show, it's a lot of, kind of smaller creators and people who are still very much in the feeling out how to navigate in the wider, public sphere, and how to network, how to identify key partners and good partners and just good people, and also excise bad people, and set limits and do that appropriately. For me and for our listeners, as people who have been managing that sort of a platform for as long as you have, and at a high level, do you have any words of advice when it comes to, what's the way to say it, to like navigating bad actors, navigating people who we collaborated with this person a while ago, and it turns out I don't want to be associated with this person anymore? I was just curious if you guys had any wisdom to pass on to kind of guard and create a community.
Well, I spend a lot of time on Twitter to pay attention to what's happening in the D&D community as well as in the greater world. And I don't understand when people say things like, "Oh, Twitter's a hellscape," or "Twitter's awful, I hate it." Because I've been using it since 2007, 2008, something like that. And I have very heavily curated my feed by blocking whoever I like, wherever I choose to. If they are saying something that I feel it crosses a line in any way, it's an instant block for me. And I don't know if it's because of this, or if it's just because of the people I do associate with and the people I do interact with. The algorithm knows that it has made Twitter feel like a positive thing for me, and I don't see the negativity around that. And I think that's true of any community. You have to positively reinforce people who are acting in good faith, and ignore/block the people who are operating in bad faith. And sometimes those change, and it's okay, and it's all right to to make those decisions as new information is available.
Makes plenty of sense to me.
Yeah, right. And there's such a good networking tool out there, and that's why and again, that's why you find folks like like your podcast, who is elevating by interviewing them. And I think that's what we aim to do with Dragon Talk, is to, shine the positive light out there. Right. And absence of that light is also an important information bit.
Yep, absolutely. I had one last question about kind of Dragon Talk itself and your experience with it before moving on to the book, which I have also more fun questions about.
All right.
But I something that I find very endlessly just fun about you guys and about the book and about kind of your rapport. You guys have been working together on this project and just generally for many years now. And you have already just today learned something new about each other. About your paths, right? And so what has it been like having kind of one co-creator? Obviously, there are a lot of other things. There's producers, there are guests, there's many, many pieces that go into the podcast puzzle. But just for you guys as hosts and getting to sit down at least once a week and interviewing, going through the fun, sometimes personal process of connecting with creators, how has that affected you guys interpersonally with each other? And what has that kind of relationship meant to you guys, if you don't mind me asking?
I love that question.
Yeah.
Really sweet. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say, I think we're like pretty good friends now.
Dot.
Right? Like,
right? Yes. Do you like me? Check one. Yes, no.
Greg and I, so we met on I think the first time we met in person was on a panel.
Yeah.
And
at PAX East with Ethan Gilsdorf.
And I thought that Greg was very, very nice. And I knew him from his role at The Escapist when he got the job at Wizards, which we write about in the book. And I met his wife, Erin. That's when I knew that Greg and I were going to be like really good friends, because I love Erin so much. And like, he's just going to have to deal with me forever because I just want to be best friends with his wife.
Friends, or else
I'm just always going to be around. But it has been a really, like, Greg and I get to do, like, we're doing this together. Like we talk to these creators together. We hear the stories together. We're constantly sharing our own stories together on the podcast. And it's like our little thing that we're experiencing together. And then it goes out in the world and then other people get to experience it. But as it's happening, it's like our little thing. And then writing a book with someone is like the biggest trust exercise you can do.
Yep.
It's like we are contractually obligated to write this book together and we cannot screw each other over, and we have to be like respectful of each other's time and deadlines. And like, I did not want to disappoint Greg at all. I was like, I'm going to write the best little book I can and I'm going to turn it in on time. And I'm still probably not going to know how to use commas, but that's okay. That's why we have editors.
Exactly. That's what copy editors are for.
But now it's like, actually today, like, I got a copy of it today in the mail. I'm sure that Greg's is like in his mailbox somewhere. Because also Greg and I live like a mile and a half away from each other. It's just like seeing our names on this book together.
Yeah.
This is very, very special. So yeah. And our families love each other. So we do hang out a lot socially. My son and Greg's daughters are BFFs, if not like slightly annoying when they're together.
Which is how you truly know a childhood good friend, is when your parents are a little annoyed by you.
Yeah, a little annoyed, but they're
born
great.
Only 2 days apart, which was also really interesting.
Wow.
Like,
yeah,
they're
exact same age.
close.
Yeah, both have a weird obsession with Pennywise.
They like to be scared, but also hate to be scared.
They do. They like to like act out weird little. Remember, we were having dinner and we just kept shouting out scenarios, and then they would act them out. We're like, "You're a barista at Starbucks, and you screwed up this guy's order. Go!" And they're like throwing each other over the couch, and just like, yeah,
It all worked. It was perfect. Yeah,
we do think like they're the future hosts of Dragon Talk.
Yes, an ancestral podcast.
You handed down
exactly elaborate crowning ceremonies. You pass off the mic and headsets to them. Yeah, whole thing.
Yeah,
I love it so much.
I'd tune in.
Right? Yeah, and I think our friendship is a big secret to making this podcast continue and why it's entertaining for people, because we truly just make each other laugh with our stupid poop jokes and funny voices. And I remember there were sometimes when we were working in the office together and we'd be catching up around our desks and we'd be like, oh wait, no, stop. We're laughing too much. We got to save this for the podcast. Don't tell me this story right now. I know it's going to be funny, but you got to tell me, in 2 hours when we're on camera.
Yep.
And make that happen. And I love that. And I think that's a really important part of why this works at all. Right. And so, I mean, and early on we had to figure out when to talk and when not to talk so that we weren't, constantly talking over each other's guests. We don't still always get that right. But what we've gotten is that we trust each other so much. And this book was amazing to write with Shelly. Shelly had written 2 other previous D&D centric books in a very funny, amazing voice that I was like, I hope I can live up to that and write it in something that can make sense. And again, I didn't want to let down Shelly either when we were writing. And I think it was, in hindsight now, one of the best experiences to write a book with someone on a project like this, because it was a constant co-host, right? It was not the entire weight of this book is on my shoulders. It was on both of our shoulders, and we could, share the load when we needed to, or lift each other up when we needed to. I mean, there were certainly points where I was like, this essay sucks. You're going to hate it. And she would read it and she'd be like, Dad, what are you talking about? That I laughed like throughout the entire thing. This was great. I'm like, really? I thought it was hot garbage, and then vice versa. I mean, sometimes you'd be like, oh, this is terrible. And I was like, oh no, I laughed, and we'd be writing late at night, at the end of our day jobs after our kids are asleep sometimes. And it was really great to be able to see Shelly in the document that I was in, working on different parts of it. And then being there and seeing each other, even if we weren't even interacting, just the fact that we both knew that we were both working on something at the same time was enough to feel really connected. And I don't think I would have, had that experience if I was doing this by myself. Right. And so I think by having such an amazing writing partner, it was, I don't know, it inspired me even more, even just beyond the content and what we were making. I was like, oh man, maybe we could write more books together, Shelly.
Yeah. So we got a lot of episodes. I mean,
that's true. It could easily be a Dragon Talk Part 2 through
more inspiring
14
stories.
probably. So I know that you guys got approached to do the book. It's University of Iowa, correct? Is your publisher? Am I remembering that correctly?
Right.
I knew it, but it's one of those where it's like, I'm going to say this wrong for sure.
Nope.
But you got approached to do it and said, hey, do you want to write a Dragon Talk book? And then you said, yes, sure, I would like to do a Dragon Talk book. Was that on the radar for you guys at all, kind of before that got floated your direction?
Not really, no. We had not even really talked about, we talked about doing expanding, trying to get more people to listen to Dragon Talk. That's about it. But we had never really thought about going into a completely different format like this. And it wasn't until Shelly was approached and we were like, is this legit? Is this an actual real inquiry by an actual editor from an actual press? That we were like, oh, okay, maybe this has got some legs. Maybe we can actually do this.
The book is structured very interestingly and written very interestingly. But I guess I'll first ask kind of the $1 million question, the gorilla in the room question. You've done 300 some episodes. How did you get it down to 29? How did you how did you pick? Because I mean, they're all great, and these are all like, oh yeah, these are 29 people of your list that that makes sense that these guys are all included. But how did you go through all of that backlog and be like, here are the ones that we're going to do for this book?
Well, yeah, that's so hard. It was we didn't know 29, but we knew we couldn't write about them all. That just wasn't going to work. But I think initially we just came up with a list. Like there were some that just rose right to the top.
Sure.
And if it were up to me, I would probably write an entire book just of teachers using D&D in classrooms, therapists just using D&D in classrooms, because I love those. Those are my type. But we obviously needed to mix them up a little. But we each had a group of interviews that really were impactful to us personally, that touched us in a way that, not to say that the other one was meh, didn't care about that one, but it was something about it stood out to one of us more than the other. We only had like one crossover on when
Really?
we like had our lists. If that's, I think that I think we only had one person that we were like, we both want to write about this person. And it just, some of them just made sense that like, I felt like Greg would be more equipped to write about a guest than I was. But I think it was mostly like the bulk of them just organically rose to the top. And then we did also, want to make sure that we were representing a large swath of the community, that people were getting a chance to read an essay about, oh, this is a famous actor in Hollywood and a state senator. And, oh, this is a person who created a Girl Scout badge, a TRPG Girl Scout badge. And this is an amazing wrestler and the creator of She-Ra. We wanted the book to really represent the Dungeons and Dragons community in the best possible way that it could.
Yeah. And I just to jump on that a little bit, it was really Shelly's tone / instinct to not just write the essay about what was in the interview, but that personal connection and being able to tell more of our stories that maybe we might have alluded to in the interview, but give more voice to why this interview was impactful to us personally as hosts, and just tell a little bit more about that. And so I don't think I really grokked that as how we were going to write these, even though that was part of the proposal, until we started to see the sample chapters that Shelly was writing. I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be not directly comparison, but like similar to Confessions of a Part-Time Sorceress and things like that, where it's like, all right, how can we get stories that aren't just that, if people had listened to this interview, they were still get something more out of it because of what we're bringing to this essay about it. Right. And so that unlocked so much more to me and allowed me to be like, okay, I can use what we talk about in the interviews and these individual peoples as jumping off points to tell about different aspects of ourselves as well as the D&D community. And once that kind of clicked for me, I was like, oh, okay, this is, some of the essays just flowed out of us because we were like, I can do this, because they end up being almost like little personal essays through the lens again of D&D and this previous interview that we had recorded. It was also really weird, just throwing that out there. It was also really weird to go back to listen to our old episodes.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah. And what was really funny about that, and Shelly has said this before too, is that we will hear someone saying something. And I had this experience too, where I was listening and the joke came to my mind of like, oh, I'm going to tell this joke.
Yes.
And then I said the joke. Me as the host in real time said the joke that I was thinking about, because I'd forgotten I had made that joke before. And I am still the same person that would say those stupid things.
I listening to both the interviews and our actual play podcasts has happened to me more than I would care to admit, for sure. And like, I bet this, and like even for other people, it's trippy. But
I think that's the sign of a good joke. But it's like,
right,
okay, that's what it is.
Right, is that in retrospect, we're like, well, of course that's the joke, because that was the joke.
That was the joke.
But yeah, that was something that really stood out to me. You have a really excellent and long kind of like preamble section that I'll ask about. But when I got to the interviews, I was very surprised at the structure, because it is not a transcript.
No, and that is important to mention.
It is like you said, it is personal essays. And I thought that was a really excellent choice. Again, especially like you said, to bring in new perspectives for someone who had heard that before. And I'm curious, what was it like bringing yourself into kind of the narrative and your experiences and your emotions and that kind of stuff? Because I know for me as an interviewer, I try to obviously shine the spotlight as much on not me as humanly possible, but you guys are writing the book, and not only are you kind of bringing your personal anecdotes into the subchapter or into the chapters, but in the preamble, talking about how you got involved in D&D, how you kind of experienced the edition wars and like all kinds of really personal stuff. So what was that like, kind of getting in that headspace and making it more personal than just quote unquote the podcast and the interviews would be normally, if that makes sense?
Well, I'll jump in here. You can jump in later, Shelly. That experience was something I did not realize was going to be important to me. We wrote the essays, most of the essays first. And
Sure.
then we wrote the introduction and that kind of history of our both our in connection with the game and everything like that. And I'm really glad we did that because it allowed us to do all the research and look back at all of the essays and all the interviews that we had done, and then set the stage for those interviews. And by doing so, we knew what we needed to set the stage for. Like I might not have gone into depth about the growth of the D&D community from the 70s to the 2000s if I hadn't written the essay around Tanya DePass, for example. Right? I was like, okay, there needs to be some context for why this is important and why that was a illustrative interview. And then in so doing, it also became like this idea, for me at least, of talking about some of the decisions that we made in the D&D brand to do what we did, and how we created events, and how we brought in so many people from different parts of the community, where in the past it might have been just very much like, here, we're making books, you buy them or you don't.
Yep.
I like being able to. I liked being able to show that there was some of the thought processes behind it. And so in some ways it became like a record of the last 7 years of working on the D&D brand in a way that you don't necessarily get to see too often from the official histories or anything like that. Like obviously there's lots of academia and John Peterson, who was someone we've had on the podcast before, talking about going back into looking at the history of things like that. But I wanted to have this idea of like, oh no, this was this era. This was, from 2015 when I started to now, and where we take it from there. So it became really important to me to get that down and be like, okay, no, this is what the D&D brand was and what we were thinking about at the time, and then hopefully it will propel us into what we're going to be doing in the future. But yeah, no, that was really interesting to make it more personal and about our small little bits of impact on what people think of as the D&D brand as a whole.
I like that kind of writing and reading, but as a reader, I love memoirs and essay collections, and as a writer, I find that I like writing about my own experiences as a way of like trying to connect with people. I especially like to write about parenting and how incredibly hard it is and all the things that nobody really tells you, because I just believe in being honest. But D&D especially is just, it's all about connections. It's all about the storytelling too.
Yeah.
So it felt natural for us as the co-hosts of this podcast and the co-authors of this book that to explain to people why this conversation made such an impact on the two of us. So that was, I guess the reasoning behind that. And we didn't want it just to be a transcript.
Right.
And then he said this, and then Greg laughed, and then this happened.
We thought that was very funny.
There we go. Yeah. It's a book about a podcast, about a game. It's like a little Russian doll of mediums.
Yeah. And as part of that, we had a lot more footnotes. There's a lot of footnotes in here now. A lot of them are explaining references as well as internal jokes. I'll let you know. There was a lot more than there are currently initially, because we had so much fun responding to each other's essays, right?
Oh, awesome.
And so those little bits of jokes that we were making to each other in audio form during the interviews, we did that in text form as footnotes. And probably better that our editor was like, maybe we should do less of
They're
those.
like so insidery, but
we were laughing so much, and I was like, what? These are great. This is comedy gold. We gotta get. So I love that because it made it feel more like a podcast to me, like had to be more of a back and forth conversation where you're not, obviously the essays are all written mostly from our singular perspective, but there's still a little bit of voice of Shelly and mine and vice versa.
Definitely.
I just really dig that.
Something you brought up, and something that was also surprising to me as I was going into the book, was there, like, the first, I think, like 30-ish pages are not just your history, or the history of D&D. Like you said, are like some insider baseball kind of thing. Some, it's very robust. And it was like, for the first time, I considered like, wait, someone who maybe did not listen to this podcast or does not know what D&D is or hasn't played D&D might be reading this book. So what do you hope, both for fans of the podcast and or fans of D&D and people who are maybe not familiar with the podcast, or maybe not familiar with D&D or these particular creators or whatever, what do you kind of hope that people take away from the book? What's, what did you guys have in mind to try and capture and express as you were taking all of these interviews and just pulling on them and adding your own personal story and highlighting other personal stories to hopefully have people connect with?
I think for me, it's the same thing that I had in mind writing the first 2 D&D books, and that is just trying to capture the magic of this game
Yeah.
and why it matters to so many people. And whether or not you're a fan of D&D, or if you're new to D&D, or you have never experienced D&D in your life, if you pick up this book, I hope that it leaves you with an understanding of how important it is to people. And I hope that you feel inspired by the ways that this game has touched people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll underline that for sure. And the reason why there is so much preamble before we get to the interviews is because we realize that you kind of need some context. You kind of need to understand why these interviews were important for us to choose and write about. And as you said, there are going to be people who are going to read this book who have no framework of what D&D is, or very little, right? And so they won't understand really why some of these stories were so impactful unless they get at least some of that context. And we try to do that in the most entertaining way possible, so it doesn't feel like a dry staid
dissertation kind of thing.
Here's the history of what happened here. So we try to keep the kind of informal, casual, jokey tone from our interviews and our essays about those interviews, and keep those in the preambles. But yeah, no, it was all done with that context, and hopefully, and then we have a little bit of an outro at the end of the essays that is about like, okay, if you are inspired by some of the things you've read here, here's how you can start playing D&D. So I really still hope that there are folks out there who are D&D curious, who may pick up this book or get this, book as a gift, as to be like, here's a good introduction to what D&D is, that isn't reading a manual, that isn't reading how to play. It's reading why are there so many news stories about it out there right now? Why is it shown in Stranger Things and as this bonding moment for these kids? Why is it, why is there going to be this huge Paramount picture that's coming out, Honor Among Thieves, that it's, going to get hopefully even more people involved in this community. I want it to be that guidepost of like, not just our experiences and why the D&D community is cool, but like, here's a sign of being like, here's why you should join it. Here's why you should be a part of this, and what you could get out of it.
I think I have 2 last quick questions before the infamous lightning round.
All right.
But it occurred to me, and you guys have alluded to it, I think, a little bit, but of listening back to all these old episodes, right? Especially the really impactful ones, the ones that sprung to mind. Was there anything to you about the process of going back and reviewing that you kind of were surprised at, or that you really appreciated about the process of really sitting down and turning these things into a book and into something that you reflected on and kind of reconnected with?
I loved seeing how the community grew over from the first interviews to the very last interviews. Just like when we talked to content creators 7 years ago, like there's so much more content, and like they're in mediums that did not exist 7 years ago that now are a thing. And also just really like to see how like the scope of guests that we get to talk to has also kind of widened, that like Greg has alluded to, like some people who are well known in their fields and just happen to be big D&D fans are like, I want to be on your podcast. I want to come talk to D&D. Like Senator, who at the time, Senator Hobbs, now Washington State Secretary, but we were like blown away by his email, like really like pitching himself hard to be on Dragon Talk. And we were like, are we going to get arrested if we say no? Like what?
Politically, it's very important you take
this. Is this bad? Are we allowed? Yeah. Is this like mandatory now?
Should we not be doing it? Are we breaking some sort of law?
He He was a wonderful guest. So yeah, for me, I just loved it. It's a really cool way to see like the growth of the D&D community.
Yeah, and I will second that and say what's interesting too is that, you know, this was a really interesting part of D&D's history, because when I started in March 2015, it was the same week that Critical Role premiered on Twitch.
Yeah.
And that changed so much, right? That changed everything as people saw others playing D&D entertainingly. No one thought that was a thing. Actresses Incorporated had been growing. We kind of talk about this in the history of D&D and how it's grown from there. But like the period here of growth in the D&D community is really unprecedented, and it didn't really start until right when this podcast started and got into its stride. And so it was really, really kind of great to look back and see like, oh yeah, no, during this period, there was a lot of change, and let's document that and get that going. So I think that was really kind of cool.
Speaking of looking back, looking forward, what do you guys hope for Dragon Talk? You know, like years down the line, what direction do you hope it goes? What wishes do you have? And this can be for the show itself, or for you guys as hosts, or kind of whatever that means to you, you know?
I mean, who knows what the future holds? I do hope that my son and Greg's daughter take over one day.
Yeah.
I do hope that Dragon Talk can continue as a platform to continue shining that light on our community, and that it's helping creators find their people, find their community, and just continuing to show the world how wide this community really is, and that, you know, no matter what you do, who you are, what you think you're into, there's probably a place for you here at someone's table. So join us. Welcome to Dragon Talk, and welcome to Dungeons and Dragons.
And as Joe Manganiello says on the back of the book, we're the Regis and Kathy Lee of the D&D world. I want that to be a reality. I want us to be on a morning talk show, sipping white wine. Maybe that's more Kathy Lee and Hoda Kotb.
We've always felt like we were Kathy and Hoda. And like,
yeah,
Joe sees us differently, which is fine.
You know, and being able to have such a you know, a larger platform to be able to talk to, even more, as you said, the responsibility of that. Like I hadn't really even considered it, but now I'm like, man, it should be bigger. It should be even, you know, beyond all of that. So, you know, that's my hope for the growth to you know, go above and beyond. And drink white wine in the morning. That's what I want to do.
I mean, may we all be so blessed with our podcast project to enable us to drink white wine in the morning, right? You guys, it is now time for the gauntlet.
I'm scared
of the Reckless Talk lightning round. I tell everyone the same things. These questions are the same for every single creator that we have on the show, in the same order. There is no wrong answers. It can be a one-word answer. It can be a long-winded, well, this reminds me of the time kind of thing, and then we go on a whole thing. It can even be, you know, I don't think I have a good answer for that. And that is all acceptable, all supported. I will try to give a reasonable amount of pause to be like, they're not saying anything else? Cool. And then we will move on with the next question. I will try to limit my own blabbering as much as humanly possible, unless you say something, you know, really weird or cool that I have to ask. We'll go Shelly, then Greg as the trade-offs. And again, there's no wrong answers. And there's also, it's not like timed. So if you need a moment to think or whatever, that is encouraged. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yes, I'm nervous.
I'm ready.
Question 1.
Mm-hmm.
Is your glass half full or half empty?
Half full.
Half full.
What excites you creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I am excited when Creativity excites me. Creative, like when I am on a roll, when I am in a project, when I'm feeling creative about something, I feel like every other part of my life benefits from that. Like I feel like I'll even eat healthier. I will sleep better. I will be better at my day job. I'm a better mom if I have like those creative juices constantly flowing. Conversely, if they're not flowing, all of that also. I'm like the Feywild, like my mood, like will just be like, ooh, the flowers are dying. Oh, they're blooming again. So yes, I think creativity is what excites me.
I think completing something excites me. A deadline, I think
Oh,
is,
yes.
you hear those stories. If people enjoy the process of writing or having written, I'm probably in the latter camp where I like having it done and complete and talking about it. So the experience of talking about Welcome to Dragon Talk, even though I enjoyed writing it with you, Shelley, I'm very glad I don't have to write it anymore.
I'm really glad too.
Nope, we did it. It's done. Let's tout it from the rooftops.
The book has been booked.
It has been bucketed.
What does not excite you creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I think any kind of fear, self-doubt, or being too inside my head, like, "Ooh, this isn't going to be good. Nobody's going to want to do this or see this or read this, or I don't know how to do that. That's too hard to figure out." No, just plow forward and do it. Gregory?
I am going to say conflict, which is a weird thing. It's not necessarily dramatic conflict, but I don't like when maybe I'll say needless conflict or disrespectful conflict, right? Where like I feel like that sucks my energy out of a project immediately.
What is your favorite sound?
The cork on a champagne bottle popping.
That is a good one.
It's usually like meaning that something good has happened.
Yeah.
Or Friday.
Friday is a good thing.
Friday is a good thing, though.
I am gonna say Shelly's C-3PO is my favorite sound.
Oh dear.
See, I'm glad you said it, because those are the kind of few exceptions that I make for. It's like, well, I can't not ask. Like I try to be reserved, but like I would have had to have asked. So I appreciate you going.
Not
for
good on demand.
What sound do you hate?
Oh, I hate the sound of certain creators on YouTube that my son loves to watch when they just scream needlessly. Like, don't scream so loud. Yeah. So I don't know how to bucket that, but just like unnecessary stopping. I feel like my mom when I say that, like, oh, just stop screaming. It's annoying. Also, chew with your mouth closed.
Right?
The worst. The worst.
Like, I gotta say it every time now. Like, come on. Mine is also kid related though. There's those tubes that they constrict, and then when they open up, there's like,
yes,
the most annoying sound in the world, and it drives me crazy, and I don't understand why they exist. And if I see them unattended, I immediately throw them away and or
Just improving the world one weird crinkly stick at a time. What is your favorite word?
Swivel.
Ooh.
Just like it.
Magnanimously.
Ooh, good one.
What is your least favorite word?
Spatula.
What's the matter with spatula?
I'm contractually obligated to not ask.
Don't like it.
I don't know if I have a least favorite word. Let me think. No.
Oh, good one.
What D&D monster or foe have you not faced or run that you would love to?
I've never faced a rust monster. I just feel like I would love to see one of those.
I have not fought against, I guess, in a long time. I think I might have actually fought. Never mind. But I was gonna say like a really ancient dragon. Like I haven't gone up against a super intelligent, iconic dragon. I've fought lesser ones, but not the ancient ones.
What is your favorite adventure of all time. And it can be, of course, a D&D adventure, but it could be an adventure movie, 1999's The Mummy, for example, or it could be one that you watched on an actual play. It can be one you experienced, one you wrote, whatever that means to you.
Okay, well, given that context, I'm going to change my answer, and I'm going to say The Goonies, classic.
Ooh.
Would love that.
Mm-hmm.
Would love to play that as a D&D adventure.
Yeah. I'm going to say Out of the Abyss.
Nice.
It was one of the first ones I worked on when I first got to Wizards of the Coast, and I like it because it has that lack of resources to start, where you can't, getting from point A to point B in the Underdark is an adventure unto itself. So I loved that desperation, and the cast of characters that are introduced early on are really iconic. And I love Stool, and I will always love Stool.
And we get a wedding in there too.
And there's a wedding. There's so much great stuff in that adventure.
What is your favorite tabletop role-playing game character of all time? And again, it can be one of yours. It can be an NPC. It could be one that you watched. It can be whatever it means to you.
I am going to say Oso de la Fez, which was a familiar that my tiefling wizard Tabitha Sparkles had with her. He was very, very divisive amongst my D&D party. Half of them pretended they couldn't see him, and the other half were just like, whatever, he's here. But yes, Oso de la Fez, the rescued circus bear.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's in the book, if I recall correctly.
A
brief mention.
I have probably mentioned him, yes.
I am going to go with a recent character that I haven't been able to play a lot recently, but Terran Zay is my bard sorcerer, glam rock, Baldur's Gatean, who is modeled off of like David Lee Roth and David Bowie had a baby. He uses his wands as amplification devices. He wears red leather pants, and he uses all of his illusion magic to create the light show around him as he dazzles people in the Elf Song Tavern. So that's my favorite character. I want to play more with him.
And you need to cosplay him.
I know, right?
But like, yes, though.
Yes. I said need. This has to happen.
It's a
requirement. Final question. What gives you hope?
I feel very hopeful about our school initiatives, and knowing that there are kids all around the world that are going to be introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. And hopefully it is something that they become inspired by, and it unlocks their little imaginations, and they form friendships that they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. And they're all going to reap the benefits that we know this beautiful little game can help them sow.
We dedicate this book to our kids and becoming dungeon masters in their own right, perhaps. And so, like Shelly, I believe the children are our future. And if we teach them well, they will lead the way.
That seems
lead the way down a dungeon.
Was that in the book, or I don't know? It seems really.
You know what? I'm going to write that down. That's really
right?
good. It's
really
inspiring.
Greg Tito. Greg, Shelly, congratulations! You have run the Reckless to Talk Gauntlet. And gotten through the lightning round. Thank you for being here. As a reward to get that final XP, the treasure that is not a mimic at the end of the dungeon, could you please take advantage of one last opportunity to tell everybody who you are, where they can find you, how to support you, all the good stuff?
Yes. Please listen to Dragon Talk wherever you listen to your podcasts, such as this one. And look for Welcome to Dragon Talk on store shelves December 5th. But pre-order it now, because we heard that you might get it early. So you can pre-order that book from University of Iowa Press's website. You can go to your local favorite bookstore and get it. You can buy it from an online retailer, wherever you like to purchase your books. We do hope that you will pre-order Welcome to Dragon Talk as well. And you can find me at Shelly Moo on Twitter and Instagram, or on my website at shellymazzanoble.com.
+1 to all that about Welcome to Dragon Talk, and it makes a great gift, I think, since it comes out on December 5th. It's a great time to get people who are D&D curious in your life and may have had some of the preconceived notions about what D&D is and what D&D players are like, and they can read this book and hopefully reassess those preconceptions. Buy it for everyone is what I'm trying to tell you. The world would be better if more people played D&D. I really do believe that.
I do too.
And so that's all about the book. Welcome to Dragon Talk. I am at Greg Tito on Twitter and Greg_Tito on Instagram. I have a lot of fun stuff going on. In addition to Welcome to Dragon Talk, I'm making a movie called Ex-Husband.
Yes.
We are putting the finishing touches on it now for going into festivals. Some more people know about that on my Twitter feed. You can also follow that Twitter on Ex-Husband Film. I think there's an Instagram as well with that under there. And I like to talk about Dungeons and Dragons on Dragon Talk, of course, and Star Trek The Next Generation on my podcast called Re-Engage. We're going through each episode of that iconic sci-fi series. We're now in season 4. We're recording episodes for that. There's a lot of crossover with some of the folks I even write about here in Welcome to Dragon Talk, our guests on that podcast. And it's really exciting. It's to go back and look at those old episodes through the lens of being older storytellers and imagine a utopia that is the 24th century. It's a better place out there. So if you enjoy sci-fi, if you haven't watched Star Trek The Next Generation in a long time, watch it one episode at a time with us and be a part of that discussion. Super fun.
We will have links to all of those things in the whatevers, the show notes, the whatever the podcast version of show notes are. Guys, thank you so much. I really deeply appreciate this opportunity. Really loved reading the book. And thank you so much for all your time and energy and everything you've done for the community.
Well, thank you,
Nathan. This was awesome.
Yes.
I loved talking about all this, and I especially love all your questions. They were in depth and made us think. So thanks.
We
for that.
really appreciate all the research that you did. So.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Lift you up.
Lift
us up.
Lift. That'll be the last noise everyone hears.
Yeah.
I love that. It sounds like it's kind of getting cut off, too.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened?